in my experience that I've seen individuals kidnapped and actually return days later. It happens, but it happens across the board.
What if someone disappears and then suddenly returns days or even weeks later? Situations like that have happened before, but investigators say they are uncommon and usually tied to very unusual circumstances. Now, more than a month after Nancy Guthrie vanished, that same question continues spreading across social media as people search for answers about what really happened. According to information gathered from investigative sources, the timeline around Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has raised serious concerns among experienced professionals. After roughly 30 days passed, discussions with former federal investigators began pointing toward the possibility that the situation may not have been random at all. One expert with extensive investigative background explained that when incidents like this remain unresolved for weeks, it often suggests planning, preparation, and a clear understanding of the surroundings. Public attention has only intensified as the case reached the 31-day mark. Many people online keep asking the same thing repeatedly. In a time when surveillance cameras, digital tracking, and advanced technology are everywhere, how could someone still carry out something like this without leaving obvious evidence behind?
This was a case that was very well planned out, and the circumstances in which she was abducted, meaning the time in the wee hours of the night in a location that had light restrictions. In other words, no light, floodlights, any sort of light is allowed. So it really allowed them to operate in a total cover of darkness. I believe they were very familiar with her habits, this house, and this neighborhood. So all that information helped them also be successful in this abduction.
Experts reviewing the situation believe the environment may have played a major role. The event reportedly happened during the quiet, early hours of the morning, in an area with strict lighting limitations. With no floodlights or strong outdoor lighting nearby, the location would have been extremely dark. Investigators say conditions like that can give someone the advantage of moving around with very little visibility, allowing actions to unfold almost completely under the cover of darkness. Investigators reviewing the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie believe the person responsible may have known her routines far better than most people first thought. Information gathered from experienced investigative sources suggests the individual may have been familiar with her daily habits, the layout of the home, and even the surrounding neighborhood. That kind of knowledge can create a serious advantage, especially during quiet overnight hours when very few people are around. Experts also believe several steps may have been taken to avoid modern tracking methods. In some situations, individuals purposely avoid carrying cell phones, so geofence searches cannot identify devices in the area. Instead, communication may happen through short-range radios, while extra care is taken to hide identity and limit fingerprints or DNA evidence. When multiple precautions like these are used together, investigators say the result can be a trail that leads to frustrating dead ends. At the same time, some details from the scene have raised questions among analysts. Early observations suggested certain actions looked awkward, including how equipment appeared to be positioned and how nearby plants were placed in front of a camera. Some experts pointed out that simply using a hand could have blocked the camera view, making that detail especially puzzling. Even with those unusual elements, many investigators believe the bigger picture still points toward planning. Looking at the overall situation, several actions appear deliberate and organized. Now, more than 30 days into the case, officials have not publicly confirmed any major breakthrough, leaving many observers wondering just how carefully this incident may have been prepared. More than a month after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, many people are asking a difficult question. When does a case like this become a cold case? According to information gathered from investigative sources, that point is nowhere close. In fact, the investigation appears to have expanded rather than slowed down. Reports indicate the case has shifted into a larger federal task force structure, with greater oversight from the FBI.
Multiple people are involved in this is typically to perpetrate a crime like this, to take somebody under their control, to transfer them to a vehicle, to have that vehicle driven to another location where they would have been placed, whether they were alive or not alive. To do all of that typically takes more than one person.
Sources familiar with federal procedures say the investigation has now been moved to the Phoenix field office, instead of remaining with the smaller Tucson resident agency. That change matters because a major field office like Phoenix has far more resources available. Investigators there have access to larger analytical teams, specialists who review digital evidence, cellmates such as games, and experts who can comb through massive amounts of data looking for connections that might otherwise go unnoticed. Experts reviewing the situation say this type of shift often signals that investigators are actively pursuing multiple directions at once. Behind the scenes, teams may be reviewing surveillance footage, digital records, communication data, and witness information all at the same time. While the public may not see daily updates, investigators often know far more than they are able to share, while the work is still ongoing. Inside a federal task force, the investigation is typically directed by a single case agent who coordinates the overall strategy. Sources indicate that in this situation, the number of federal personnel involved is unusually large. Reports suggest that roughly 100 FBI agents have been assigned to assist in different parts of the investigation. To put that scale into perspective, analysts often compare it to other high-profile cases where far fewer agents were involved at the peak of the effort. When a large investigation like this moves into a federal task force, the first step is organizing the agents into specialized teams. According to investigative experts familiar with these procedures, different groups are assigned very specific duties. One major team focuses entirely on analyzing digital evidence, which includes phone data, online activity, and any social media information connected to the case. Every message, location signal, and digital trace can become a critical clue when examined closely. Another group focuses on witness statements gathered during the early stages of the investigation. In cases like this, agents often conduct what is known as neighborhood canvassing, where investigators speak with residents and gather observations from the surrounding area. Homes near the locations connected to Nancy Guthrie were reportedly included, along with other nearby areas the public may not even be aware of. Analysts must carefully organize and review these interviews so investigators clearly understand what each person reported seeing or hearing. Video evidence is another major focus. Investigators often collect footage from nearby homes, businesses, traffic cameras, and other surveillance systems in the area. Specialists then review that footage frame by frame, looking for vehicles, movement patterns, or anything that stands out. Supervising agents coordinate with analysts who carefully track and compare these visual details across many hours of recordings. At the same time, another group of investigators focuses entirely on incoming tips. Large cases can generate tens of thousands of leads from the public, and every single one must be logged, reviewed, and followed up when necessary. Agents assigned to this task often spend their time tracking down information, verifying details, and determining which leads might actually move the investigation forward. Experienced investigators also revisit the case from the beginning, carefully re-examining every known detail. Much like peeling back layers of an onion, they start again with the earliest information to make sure nothing important was overlooked. Sources say this process can reveal connections that were not obvious at first. With so many teams working at once, a huge amount of activity may be happening behind the scenes, even when the public hears very little about the progress. One detail that immediately caught investigators' attention involved several demand letters that were reportedly sent during the case. According to information reviewed by analysts, the sender claimed that Nancy had been seen south of the border. At this stage, officials have not confirmed whether those messages are legitimate or simply attempts to create confusion. Still, statements like that often become part of the evidence investigators carefully examine while trying to determine who might be behind them. Experts studying the circumstances say incidents like this often involve more than one person. In many cases, controlling someone, moving them from a home to a vehicle, and then transporting them to another location requires coordination. Each step requires timing, awareness of surroundings, and the ability to move quickly without drawing attention. Because of that, investigators sometimes look closely at whether multiple individuals may have worked together during the event. Surveillance footage has also raised additional questions. Analysts reviewing the video noticed that locks near the back of the property appeared to have been changed, which may suggest entry was made through the rear of the home. Before moving through the garage area, one person captured on camera near the front porch appears to focus directly on a security camera. Experts believe that individual may have been attempting to block or disable the camera, so movement near the front entrance would not be clearly recorded. Investigators say that type of action could indicate a division of responsibilities. Rather than one person handling everything, the situation may have involved separate roles carried out at the same time. Some analysts reviewing the footage have also pointed to what appears to be a small device with an antenna in the pocket of the person near the porch. If that object is indeed a handheld radio, it could suggest communication with someone else nearby. Devices like that are typically used when more than one person is coordinating actions in real time. A surprising detail in the investigation involves physical evidence found not far from the scene connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Reports indicate that several gloves were recovered a few miles away, immediately drawing the attention of investigators. Items like that are carefully examined because they can contain trace evidence such as DNA or other identifying material that may help identify who handled them. According to investigative sources, those materials were processed and submitted through national forensic databases, where analysts compare DNA evidence against existing records. Early reviews did not produce an immediate match, which can happen when the DNA does not belong to anyone already listed in the system. While that result can slow things down, investigators say it does not mean the evidence has lost its value. One reason the gloves became so important is that their characteristics appeared similar to what analysts believe the individual seen near the porch may have been wearing. However, experts emphasize that the public video released early in the investigation may not show the same level of detail that investigators actually have access to. Specialized forensic laboratories are capable of enhancing surveillance footage using advanced imaging techniques. Analysts can improve lighting, sharpen outlines, and reveal details that may look completely unclear in the original recording. Investigators say images that appear blurry to the public can sometimes reveal important clues once processed through these systems. Because of these enhancements, experts believe authorities may be reviewing footage that is far clearer than what has been shown publicly. In many investigations, enhanced video can reveal objects, movements, or small details that were almost impossible to notice at first. That means the footage investigators are studying behind the scenes could be providing far more information than most people realize. We're often told that the first 48 hours are the most critical when someone goes missing. That early window is when investigators usually have the best chance of finding clear leads. In the case of Nancy Guthrie, that period has long passed, which has left many people wondering about the chances of finding her and whether she could still be located alive or if the outcome may be different. Those are difficult questions that investigators carefully consider as time moves forward. Experts involved in cases like this say that even after the first few days, investigations continue to evolve with different tools and methods. One of the major resources investigators rely on is the National DNA Database, known as CODIS. This system holds millions of DNA profiles collected from convicted individuals, from certain arrests in many states, and also from evidence gathered during previous crime scene investigations across the country. Because of that, CODIS contains a huge range of information that investigators can compare with new DNA evidence. However, specialists point out that even with millions of profiles in the system, it still represents only a portion of the total population in the United States. That means some DNA evidence may not immediately produce a match, especially if the person connected to it has never been entered into the database. Another tool that has become increasingly important in recent years is genetic genealogy. Many people today voluntarily submit DNA to ancestry services because they are curious about their family history. They often want to know where their ancestors came from and what their background might be. With proper legal authorization, investigators can sometimes use that type of genealogical data to help compare unknown DNA and potentially narrow down who it could belong to. One decision early on can make or break an investigation, and in the Nancy Guthrie case, the handling of the scene has become a hot point. Sources familiar with the timeline say the property was opened back up sooner than some experts would prefer, and that later forced multiple return visits. Some analysts believe keeping it sealed longer could have reduced later disputes. Records reviewed by investigators indicate 4 separate searches took place. The first, led by the Pima County Sheriff's Office, ran about 20 hours from Sunday into Monday. About 3 days later, the FBI assumed control and completed another sweep, then returned again after realizing a rooftop camera had been missed and that Nancy Guthrie's vehicle needed to be collected as evidence. After that third visit, officials reportedly went back a 4th time, when they identified a septic system on the property that also required checking. Specialists say repeat entries can create headaches later, because defense teams may challenge how evidence was preserved and whether anything was accidentally disturbed or introduced. Each new search changes the environment, even when everyone is careful. Best practice guidance is blunt. Lock the area down and control traffic. Experts say there should be a single, clearly marked route in and out for investigators, attorneys, and any authorized personnel, with tight logs and limited access. That set path helps prevent cross-transfer and keeps the broader scene intact for court review. Control in the first hours of an investigation can shape everything that follows. Some experts reviewing the Nancy Guthrie case say they would have kept media crews several blocks away from the scene to reduce pressure and limit outside influence. In many investigations, law enforcement command posts are also positioned far from public areas, so operational discussions stay separate and information leaks are less likely. The public conversation around the case has also intensified online. Savannah Guthrie has shared emotional messages on social media about the disappearance of her mother, even suggesting at one point that Nancy may already be gone. Analysts who follow missing person investigations say comments like that often reflect the fear and uncertainty families face when time passes. Without clear answers, investigators frequently emphasize that the early hours in a case like this are critical. The commonly repeated first 48 hours guideline is not just a phrase. It reflects how quickly evidence and leads can fade. Some specialists even argue that the first 24 hours can be the most decisive period when someone's life may be at risk and every available resource needs to move immediately. As days pass, the chances of locating someone alive can unfortunately decrease. Still, many analysts believe the case itself could eventually be solved. One key reason is the surveillance footage investigators were able to recover. Reports indicate that technical teams worked carefully to extract usable video from storage systems by analyzing timestamps and data fragments, even though the material was not stored in a cloud system. Experts say the result was remarkable. By isolating specific frames and improving the clarity, investigators were able to identify distinct physical features of the individual captured in the footage. Observers note that certain traits, especially around the eyebrows and facial shape, appear very recognizable. Some believe that someone who personally knows that individual could immediately recognize who it is. Distinctive features in surveillance footage can sometimes become the key that unlocks an entire investigation. Analysts reviewing the video connected to the Nancy Guthrie case say certain traits of the individual captured on camera stand out clearly. Observers point to the shape of the mustache, the way the lips appear, the tone of the face, and even the style of clothing. Details like where someone typically buys clothes or how they usually present themselves can all help investigators build a clearer profile of the person in the footage. Experts say these types of details often become recognizable to people who personally know the individual. A family member, friend, coworker, or neighbor might notice small characteristics that others would overlook. In many investigations, tips from people who recognize a specific walk, facial feature, or clothing style have helped authorities move closer to identifying someone captured on video. Another question that often comes up in cases like this is whether people who are taken against their will have ever returned days or even weeks later. Specialists familiar with kidnapping investigations say that in rare situations it has happened. However, those cases are usually connected to organized criminal activity, where the motive is financial rather than concealment. Investigators point out that in some regions, criminal groups have historically used kidnappings as a way to demand payment from families. In those situations, negotiators may become involved while communication takes place between the offenders and relatives. The individual may eventually be released after payment is arranged because the act is treated by the offenders as a profit-driven operation rather than an attempt to permanently hide the victim. Experts explain that in those cases, communication with families typically begins quickly and demands are made within a short period of time. The process is designed to pressure relatives into negotiating while also ensuring the offenders maintain their ability to demand payments in future incidents. Because of that structure, investigators say those situations often follow a very different pattern than many other disappearance cases. In some kidnapping situations, experts describe the process as a clear exchange, what investigators sometimes call a quid pro quo. In those cases, the person is taken, and communication with the family begins quickly, usually with a demand for money. Analysts say those incidents are often connected to organized criminal activity, where the goal is profit, rather than permanently hiding the victim. However, specialists familiar with the Nancy Guthrie case say that type of pattern has not appeared here. According to sources who have reviewed similar investigations, there is little indication that organized groups from outside the United States would risk entering the country to carry out a complex abduction involving an elderly victim. Many experts say that scenario would be extremely unlikely under current border conditions. Some analysts say a different possibility cannot be completely ruled out. While they do not believe the individuals responsible likely came from another country, they say investigators sometimes consider whether someone could transport a victim across a border after the initial incident. Authorities often review travel routes and nearby crossings during major investigations to determine whether movement in that direction could have occurred. Others point out that the surrounding desert terrain near Nancy Guthrie's home presents its own challenges for investigators. Large desert regions can stretch for miles with very little activity, which can make searches extremely difficult. Experts say remote environments like that can unfortunately allow evidence or remains to go undiscovered for long periods of time. Because of those factors, investigators typically examine every possible scenario. Nancy Guthrie could still be somewhere within the United States, or the events could have unfolded in ways that are not yet clear. For analysts reviewing the case, the key focus remains identifying the person seen in the surveillance footage and understanding exactly what happened during the critical moments surrounding her disappearance. Important insight has continued to emerge as investigators and analysts examine the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Experts who reviewed the available evidence say discussions with experienced investigators have helped the public better understand how complex cases like this are handled behind the scenes. Their analysis has provided valuable perspective on investigative procedures, forensic tools, and the difficult decisions authorities must make as they search for answers. Throughout the investigation, specialists with law enforcement backgrounds have offered observations about evidence handling, surveillance analysis, and the challenges involved when time passes without clear breakthroughs. These perspectives do not replace official findings, but they often help explain the processes investigators may be following while working through thousands of tips, reviewing digital data, and analyzing surveillance footage. Cases like this can take time to unfold, especially when investigators are carefully verifying information and protecting the integrity of the evidence. Analysts say patience is often necessary because many investigative steps happen quietly behind the scenes before authorities are ready to confirm developments publicly. For families and communities following the case, that waiting period can be incredibly difficult. What remains clear is that the search for answers continues. Investigators are still examining the available evidence, reviewing surveillance details, and analyzing information that could eventually reveal who was involved and what exactly happened during the events surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. NCC News will continue tracking every verified update and forensic development. Thank you for supporting and watching this news channel. With you was NCC News and your host, Jim Parker. Stay alert, stay informed, and let's keep pushing for answers.